Mike, we're live on all the things.
Yep. Welcome back.
I guess thank you. I was gone. I was on vacation. I guess we have to figure out how to go live on Threads. We haven't even talked about whether you like Threads or not, but I guess we'll figure that out. Do you even know what Threads is?
I do.
Okay, good to know.
Here's what I know. Here's what I know. Twitter got a great endorsement over Threads. Did you see this?
No, what?
Did you see who it was from? The Taliban.
Terrific.
They like Twitter better because it's
terrific.
Not moderated.
Great. Hey, there are a couple quick announcements. Number one, some folks are saying, hey, when's the next healthcare data breach report? We're working on it right now. It'll be out in a couple of weeks. That's number one. Number two, we have security awareness training coming up next week. If you want to sign up, go to our website, criticalinsight.com, click on events, and you can sign up for it there. But there's, every week we cover, what's the cyber news. And, Mike, pretty big news yesterday. And I hadn't heard about the illness, so I guess I was surprised by it. But Kevin Mitnick died, 59 years old. And he had an impact on your life and your career.
So he had an impact on a lot of people. I mean, some good, some bad. Just briefly, here's the story. So when I was an undergrad at USC, I had system privileges on the VAX computers in the geology department. If you don't know what a VAX is, Google it. And I had been running these underground bulletin boards, and I had started a big one for USC to use. It was kind of our, social media platform in the 80s. And I got a call from some guy saying, hey, I been a member of your bulletin board, and this was somebody I knew. He said, do you have any unused accounts on the VAX in the geology department that I could use? Because I want to send email to some friends of mine on the internet, and I don't have any other way to do it. And I said, sure, here you go. Here's an unused account. And the guy that I gave that account to was the best friend of Kevin Mitnick. I don't want to name him. And he and Mr. Mitnick ended up using that account, and others probably, to get into all of that trouble. And the FBI crawled up my backside about that, dragged my girlfriend in and rubber hosed her. That's what she said. And, and I brought, the artifact here out. This is from Mitnick's lawyer. In 1996, the government investigated and documented its knowledge of the computer hacking activities of persons known as Michael Hamilton and my girlfriend's name. And so trying to make it sound like I was involved in this somehow. And that was unpleasant. And later, I met up with Kevin, I think it was at RSA, and he was doing a book signing thing. And I have his book over here, and he autographed and it said, Mike, I still have your password, Kevin. Yep. True story.
So even though it was his friend, he knew it was you.
So his friend basically was doing it for him because his friend knew me. He could coerce me into something like that. I mean, the guy was fantastic. I remember at one time he was trying to break into one of my bulletin board systems that I had configured to look like a Unix system. And he's trying all these Unix commands and getting these really weirdo error messages. And I broke in on him and started, what are you doing? And he disappeared. He actually used a phone trick on me to get access to that system where basically he calls up the phone company, says, I'm a service technician. I need you to do a rollover number on this. And then he gives me that number to call him. It rolled over to his phone. I talked to him, and then that phone number was never good anymore. I mean, so the guy was good at what he did.
Yeah. And quite famous for it, of course. It's just interesting to hear, the story of your early career, how he had an impact on it. Do you still have that autograph?
I do. I also have his business card, which is a little piece of stainless steel business card with lockpicks cut into it.
Of course it was. Of course.
Coolest business card ever.
That's a great business card. Business card. All right. We have other news to discuss, but there's more to that story, and Mike over a beer probably has more to add.
I do. This is not the venue.
This you mean here live on Threads?
This is not the forum.
So, the other big news that happened is, we've been tracking the White House cyber strategy, their initial push towards NIST CSF for all critical infrastructure. And now the next thing has happened. Tell people what it is.
Well, so there were complaints that, hey, this is a great looking plan. How are you going to pull this off? And so they've come out with the implementation plan. The implementation plan is pretty straightforward, and it's not very long. It basically designates the agencies that are going to do certain things, like who's in charge of the software bill of materials, and who's in charge of the IoT seal of approval. There's already been some pushback on some of this stuff. That the water sector got some new requirements, and then a couple of states said, no, this creates an unfunded mandate and we're not going to let this happen. And so that's all up in the air right now. There's probably going to be more of that, but at least they've put together a plan on here's how we're going to achieve all of these things. And remember, some of these things are going to have to include legislative action, and that's likely the best opportunity for them to stall out.
Yeah. Yeah. And,
wasn't that delicately said? You like that?
The way you said stall out. Yeah. What do you think is a no-go in there? What do you think is just not going to happen?
What I think is going to be difficult legislatively is the liability framework that is going to have to be included in this Secure by Design initiative, right? So federal government, using the power of the purse, says we're not going to buy your stuff unless it meets all these requirements. Along with that, what they're suggesting is there has to be a liability framework so that if someone makes a representation about the security of their product and it's found out to be wrong and carnage is everywhere, they're going to hold them liable for that. And so that liability framework has to be designed by Congress, and that's what they're not likely to do.
Got it.
Yep.
So, and then another big thing, and this was a surprise to a lot of people, although not one of our product folks who I heard today. He said, I knew this was coming. Microsoft and its big announcement about expanding logging.
Right.
Yeah.
This is something I complained about, and this was actually in the blast a couple of days ago with and I forget what publication this was in. They were saying how reprehensible it is and has been. And I've complained about this with you here.
Absolutely
right?
True.
How Microsoft making people pay for their own log events is absolutely reprehensible. And so then we had this big, China nation state attack, and they stole a bunch of email from federal government agencies, and all of these things happened. Microsoft, okay, you know what? We're going to loosen up that whole logging thing. And regardless of the license you have, we're going to make those logs available, and we're going to house them for twice as long, now 180 days. So if you need to go back, you're going to have that information there for, forensic purposes. So good on you, Microsoft. Wow. It's kind of late.
That's what I was going to ask, is do you think, has it been
management
so long
by landmine, babe? That's what that is.
Oh, and then, another, one of the things we always talk about here is, when there's a city, county, hospital that's had a major breach. One of the ones we got to mention is Hayward, California. It's just south of Oakland, dealing with a ransomware attack.
They are hurting. They are hurting bad. And the thing that's been impacted the most is 911 dispatch. Right. Their words were 911 dispatch has had to pivot the most in this emergency. Right. Which means that they have to dispatch using radio instead of the mobile data terminals. Logging is all screwed up. Right. There's a computer aided dispatch system that's also supposed to be feeding a logging thing called the records management system. Right now, all of that is in question. So when stuff happens, it's going to take longer for law enforcement to get there, and the records they're keeping may not be sufficient to go back later if something happens and you need to look at those records.
And by the way, and speaking of that breach, I was at the American Hospital Association conference, which was in Seattle this last weekend.
Did they talk about the biggie?
And hopping in there on Sunday, everyone was talking about the HCA breach.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, names, contact info, date of birth, which is exactly what you need to be able to call a hospital and convince them you are who you just give them your date of birth. For whatever absurd reason, that's all they ask for, but also details on the appointments they've had. So, and some of this stuff has now been made public, right? And interestingly, it does not look like it was ransomware. It
Mhm.
looks like just records theft. So, again, we've seen an uptick in ransomware lately, but still, when we're talking about the health sector, I still think that the focus there is on the records because it keeps them from being labeled terrorists.
Mhm. Mhm.
You're just a
The
criminal.
the but yeah, I mean, everybody was talking about it, and a couple of things there. Number one, people are talking about the fact that it wasn't, a ransomware lockup, that it was
Hmm.
records theft, which seems to be, how a lot of these, they're still terrorists. How these,
Yeah.
how these bad guys are getting away from getting the terrorist label because they're not actually, they're just stealing records. Just, still ridiculous and awful.
Well, yeah, but I mean, in terms of, so aren't we going to do soon as we talked about the healthcare data breach report that we're going to do, but aren't we doing a panel soon on healthcare
Yeah, it's
security
coming up.
controls?
Coming up
When
in
is-
August. Yeah.
I should probably know that since I'm going to be on it.
Yep.
Better check that out.
And by the way, so one of the surprising things, based on what happened in Hayward and based on the HCA thing, surprise, cyber insurance rates down 10%. What's up with that?
That is a surprise. Well, so what it means is,
They jacked
finally,
them up too high.
well, they jacked them up too high, but
Mhm.
no, they're figuring out how to price this risk.
Mhm.
We've gone through this period of time where the insurance companies have become basically everyone's regulator, and they said you have to have this and this and this and this and this if you want insurance, and then later if something happens, we come back and we're going to find out you didn't have that stuff in place. We're not going to cover you. All of that stuff has started to take hold now, and I think organizations in general are toeing the line when it comes to controls, at least the ones that they need to demonstrate to insurance companies. And so, because that's the information that they're using to, make these calculations in the absence of actuarial tables, they're learning better how to price this risk. And so, I think that's why the rates have come down. There is also some guidance out recently about when you get this insurance, make sure you get the kind that will cover third party problems, right? And I forget exactly what that kind of insurance is called. Do you remember? I don't remember
Off
what
the top
that
of my head,
it's
no.
not third party coverage, it's something like that.
Mhm.
But you got to make sure that the definition of insured computer network includes vendors, service providers, stuff
Right.
like that.
Right.
And I don't know how much more that costs. Okay, if the rates have come down
Or if
10%,
it's even
talking about,
available to you. Yeah.
or if it's even available, right? Because
Right.
it seems to me they would need to go out to those third parties as well and say, show me your controls.
Right. Right. Hey, by the way, speaking of things that you have said before when we've done this podcast, video, whatever we want to call this,
Hmm.
is that the government needs to do more with cybersecurity for smart devices, and
Yeah.
now it seems like the administration is doing that.
Yeah, that's the IoT seal of approval I was glibly talking about there.
Yeah. I mean, and finally, am I going to be allowed, Mike, to have a Ring doorbell and a connected coffee maker and all of those things that I already have that you hate?
No. So it's so we talked about this, and it was going to be like an Underwriter Labs kind of
Mhm.
mark, right? Which is trusted. Everybody's known that for a long time. This one's called the U.S. Cyber Trustmark. Okay, and it will mean that anything bearing that mark meets the security standards that are based on what NIST is coming up with that those products need to achieve in terms of security, not only out of the box, but in terms of vulnerability identification and communicating vulnerabilities and providing patches and things like that. And right, and again, the federal government can do whatever they want around this and say, if this seal is on there, we're not going to buy it. But
Mhm.
plain and simple, it's just completely market driven. So, I mean, hats off to the federal government for turning capitalism against itself. Okay, that's not exactly accurate, but it's the way I think about it.
Okay, the mind map of Mike's mind, I guess.
Yeah, but this is going to apply to, and I believe this is also going to apply to medical IoT, which is super important.
Right,
when
of course.
we're talking about stuff, it's like, oh, I can't, see the video from your Ring doorbell. It's I can turn off your infusion pump. Those are two different impacts altogether.
They are. Or I mean, even more importantly, I can't make my coffee in the morning.
Okay, well, like that medical IoT, I mean, to me, that falls in that's critical infrastructure in the healthcare sector, which is critical, right?
I agree. That is much more critical than my coffee in the morning.
You probably don't think so, but it is.
I mean, I do live in Seattle, and coffee is important, Mike. Okay. Oh, and I think threats and vulns. Back to Microsoft. Lot of threats and vulns to talk about, especially since we haven't done this for a couple of weeks.
Yeah, I know. I mean, there's so much has happened that there's no way to get caught up in 15 or 20 minutes. But so here's the threat before we talk about vulnerabilities. So article comes out, says Russia is expected to increase critical infrastructure attacks. Okay. And so this is their war strategy. It's this hybrid strategy, and part of it's disinformation, part of it's infrastructure disruption, part of it's like shooting bombs. Okay. So when something like this comes out and we go, oh, I've seen stuff like this before, right? How real is this? I just want to point out what just happened in Canada. All right. And I don't know if you and I have talked about this, but month, 6 weeks, something like that ago, 2 months, a pipeline got hit. And you and I talked about it, and we said, hey, we haven't heard of fuel disruptions or anything like that. We don't know how real this is. Maybe it got a hold of control systems, but it got kicked out, blah, blah, blah.
Sure.
Soon thereafter, an intelligence brief came out that said that Russia was going to be attacking Canada's energy infrastructure because Canada was ramping up their production to compensate for the fact that the EU doesn't want to buy Russian gas anymore, and that ticked off the Russians. Okay, just like this, Russia expected to increase critical infrastructure attacks, and then like a week later, it happened. They hit Suncor, so it's not only the control systems that presumably have something to do with refining product and potentially moving around through pipelines and things like that, but also their point of sale systems at their gas stations. So nobody can buy gas with a card anymore. You got to use cash. Who has cash? So that is a threat that we need to keep in the back of our minds. And ordinarily, I would poo-poo that a little as well. But the fact that it just happened in Canada makes me take that more seriously. Now let's talk about vulns. Okay. So Exchange servers are being turned into malware command and control centers. And it's this thing called delivery check. And it's, a server-side component that basically lets somebody take this thing over. So if your Exchange server is doing C2 for organized crime, you probably want to start taking some measurements and figure out if that's true. Apple emergency patch. I have updated my iPhone. This also applies to iPads, MacBooks, everything, Mac OS, iOS, right? So update all your Apple stuff. New 0 days for Windows users. The big patch dump just came out. This one is not covered. If you get an HTML attachment in email, do not open it. Okay. Check this one out. CVE is the number is 36884. Cisco SD-WAN is being taken over. There is a CVE for that. It's 20214. There's a this one's clever. They're coming up with fake proof of concept exploits for a Linux kernel vulnerability. Here we go. Here's a proof of concept. Check it out. You can take over Linux with this. And people download it. They want to check it out. It's malware. So, all right. Watch out for that. And what's the last one I'll tell you about? Adobe Cold Fusion. Remote code execution bug. The CVE is 29300. If you have Cold Fusion, make sure that gets patched. There's lots and lots and lots of others that have happened since the last time you and I have talked, but those are the most current ones.
Good. Very, very important. And now my favorite thing. And for those of you who watch this, at the end, we have a kicker. And the kicker is when Mike has something funny, something that makes you smile. Mike thinks it's something to make you think a little deeper. What do you got? What do you got, Mike?
My favorite one over the last 2 or 3 weeks, or however long it's been, is an article that's titled "AI Loses Its Mind After Being Trained on AI Generated Data." So, with all the talk of the robots are going to take over and we're doomed, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, it turns out if we're not around to provide actual data to train these things on, and AI comes with its own AI generated data, it gets weird real quick. If you read the article, it's like 3 generations of trying to simulate images of people, they get insanely weird really quickly. So, it's what's the quote? It's enough AI spun stuff. This self-consumption will break the model's digital brain. And indeed, if you look at the pictures, that's exactly what happened. Not funny enough. Not
That's
funny
pretty
enough.
good. Yeah. What do you
Okay.
get? Another one? I don't know. Do you have another one up your sleeve?
The one that just happened to the military is pretty funny.
What did I get?
So a typo in an email message ended up leaking millions of U.S. military emails to a web operator in Mali. Why? Because .mil is real close to .ml. And when they start sending stuff around and they misspell that, it's all going to somebody in Mali who's got to
Oh
be
my god.
cracking up.
Oh my god. That's really good.
Yeah.
That's good. That's good.
Okay.
And you
Okay.
know what? And you know what I just realized?
Hmm.
That as .ml, they could probably make a lot of money in Mali being like, machine learning.
No. No,
No?
machine learning is 20th century, man. It's AI now.
All right. Well, I'm going to ask
Okay.
ChatGPT how to end this. And by the way, we do have chat saying that they want to see the photos. All right. Anyway, all right, Mike. It was great doing this with you. Everybody, we'll see you later, and
Hopefully see you next week.
see you next week. And remember, .mil, not .ml. That's a good one. I'm going to
Exactly.
remember that one. All right. Bye bye.
Bye.